My name is Kambui Olujimi. We are at Prentice Hall at Columbia University on 125th and Broadway.
Cool. And you were just saying, you were getting ready to tell us about your journey in being an artist and having this studio here at Columbia.
I started really as a kid. When I was 3, and I was making stuff. I was doing collage from like 3 to 7, hard, seriously. And my mother was like, "You should be an artist," and I was like, "Artist? I'm into animals. I'm gonna be, a zookeeper or animal behavior." Like that was my jam. Then I got into science, and my father is Muslim, and it's a non-figurative tradition, and so I really loved math, and so the geometric patterns that are the sort of basis of a lot of Islamic art went hand in hand, and I was making all these intricate geometric patterns at like 8, and I got to use a compass, and I was excited. I was like, I get to use sharp things because I'm big. And and so I kept doing art, but it was always going to be like the fourth thing, like if not physics or math or animals, then poetry. And one by one, poetry really bumped until I was like 16, and I was about poetry, and it broke my family's heart. They were like, "You are going to be broke, and you are going to be," I was like, "Well, I got poetry and jazz, that's what I'll do." And they were like, "You're a lost cause." And then when I was about 15, I taught myself how to use a camera, and poetry and collage still remain sort of the backbone of my practice. And from there, I got into photography, into sculpture, into installation, into film. But the structure and the sort of formal design of those two things, poetry and collage, still are like how I enter my practice and how I understand it.
Mm-hmm. As you're coming up, and then you talk about poetry and jazz, and now you're making this other stuff.
Uh-huh.
How do you get from there to here?
I don't really know that they're that far apart from me in my head, because I think, so one of the things I love about collage is that in collage you take these elements that normally are not believed to talk to each other or know each other, and through a kind of synthesis, they become not only neighbors but family, and they can speak to this third thing that maybe was untouchable or unseeable before. And so that's one thing, and then with poetry, it's a lot of like slip punches. So you describe a world, but you don't always land like on the beat. You don't always land in a way that you give everything to the viewer. You force the viewer or the reader in poetry. You force the reader to build it with you.
Right.
And disavow it too. And be like, "Oh no, this is bullshit. Oh no, yeah. Oh, he said it was a pretty house, but I think this voice is kind of lying, or this voice exaggerates." And so that kind of interplay and gaps, I think, are essential in my work. So I hope for viewers to come and they see what I'm doing, and I give them a structure to enter, but they complete it, or they use it, actually, like mash it up.
Right.
And so I think that's where that link is for me, formally.
I think that the idea of the non-figurative is still a really big part of what it is that you're doing now. And I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more, or maybe just think through how, just that kind of, that precedent of working aesthetically in a non-figurative way has seemed to still be present in what you're doing.
It's funny you say, because I never really thought of my work as non-figurative. I very much find it to be about the body. A lot of times, but I think the way it's not through render, it's not through rendering. It's like it's about the body because of its scale. So it forces you to move back, or it moves you around, or it invites you to like look underneath, or like put your face up and look underneath this paper bag, like in testing 1, 2, 3, where it was these paper bag sculptures, and one of them had a peephole, and you looked inside, and there was a video that you could watch inside, and because of the optics and the peephole, it looked like it was huge. It looked like it was like this big, but the bag was only this big. And to me, that's engaging in the body and sort of entering the body. Same thing with a piece like Finding and Forgetting, where it's about the body, and it's a piece where there are 2 exhausted dancers. Well, I'll talk to you a little bit more about that piece and certain ideas I'm playing with and thinking about now, where I'm interested in sculpture as a piece of architecture that actions happen to, and so the actions can vary, and because the parameters for that interaction are set, that's the piece. So, for instance, the structure that was used for this performance in April, there'll be a different performance enacted on the same piece of sculpture. And I'm interested in a sort of remnant that's left, like a kind of activation. And I'm still interested in writing about it to sort of formulate it a little better. But I like that you can enact onto an object, and that's the object. So you put these things that are unseen into this piece. So each action is not a separate piece. The accumulation of these actions onto the architecture is what it is. So a school is a school in part by design, but it's also by utility. But some days you'll have gym in it, some days you'll have, foxtrot, some days you'll have math class. That accumulation of action is what imbues the school to be school. And so I'm interested in what happens when you start doing that with your work.
So
my work.
So the idea of the accumulation of actions, I mean, it sounds like you're saying that's something that runs through your practice as an artist. You're thinking about that.
I think I've come to that, and now I'm sort of trying it out with this piece. I think in earlier pieces, there's a dance with the audience. I think a lot of them, like Finding and Forgetting, like now I can only hear, wow, I can't believe it's my penny piece.
Which one?
My penny piece.
You can call it the penny piece.
No, I have it right here. I can't believe Fishy for Wishes. I was like, I could only hear him going, your penny piece.
That happens a lot with artists, what is the name of that project?
Just that thing I made.
Call that thing? Fishing for Wishes.
Oh yeah, so, with something like, with a piece like Fishing for Wishes, you have a Hall of Fame for 10 wishes from my life that were, really influential. And so the piece was installed in a bank in Jamaica, Queens, as a part of Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning, the Jamaica Flux project. So it was a public piece, and people would come and they would throw pennies on it and make their own wishes. And so soon, even while I was installing, people were putting pennies down, and it was there for a couple of years, but pennies would fall off of it because people would just add pennies to the sculpture.
It became like a penny fountain.
It did, but there was no water. There was resin that looked like water, and just that signifier was enough for that kind of engagement. And so, also a kind of dance where, like, I do a series of pieces that I try and do every couple of years. They're like the Lost River, and then one year I did, for 3 years in a row, I did the Lost Rivers rock skipping contest. So I made these trophies, and I had people skip rocks. It was like a rock skipping contest for different ages, and I showed people how to skip rocks. We did it up in Hudson, Maine. We did it in Queens, and I like this kind of interplay with viewers. And then I also did a Lost Rivers Dream Index. So I made these dream books, and you go to any neighborhood, and you'll find these dream interpretation books. And you'll find them in China, you'll find them in Trinidad, you'll find them pretty much anywhere in the world. And so I wanted to engage and be a part of that tradition. So I wrote a book that was a dream index, and then printed it, had them disseminated in Connecticut where the show was, and also in Bed-Stuy where I'm from, in different bodegas, and they were sold alongside of like all the other dream books. And then the images, the illustrations, completely consumed the gallery. So we painted the whole gallery black, and then I did a 85-foot wall painting on it. But that play that happens in a bodega is really interesting to me outside of the gallery, where the gallery is a contact point, but then people are like, oh, I've never seen this one before, I'll just buy that, you know? And then they take it home and they're like, oh, this one is kind of weird, or this one is wrong. Like, I like when people are like, it don't work like that.
So who's doing the buying in this?
There's a market. There's already a market for dream books.
I see.
And people buy them all. I mean, it was funny, I had someone in the studio, and I have a couple here, a couple samples, because people were like, oh, I've never seen that. And you go to the corner, there's like 10 of them. It's just like, not if it's not in your head, you're like, oh, it's just a box of books.
Right.
But pretty much, definitely in New York City. And I found them in Omaha, I found them, you know, they have them all over the world, these dream interpretation books. And so it's nice to be outside of a kind of art market and have this really, to me, it's really intimate that people engage with you about their dreams in their home, you know, and use it, you know, and I'm like, I don't know, are these really my lucky numbers, or no? I dreamt about alligators, does it really mean that, you know? And it's a place for suggestion, so I also maybe wouldn't have car, but I might have like, you know, Segway. I might not have like, you know, Arch, but I might have Arc de Triomphe. You know, like I may have whatever I want, and just the idea, the suggestion that one may dream about those things, I feel like is a pretty powerful place to have.
Right.
You know, like you can say, hey, people do dream about these things.
Yeah.
And so it's fun.
Well, I'm gonna hear you talk, because you were speaking about your relationship to the viewer as a dance, right? And a dance requires some, you know, kind of, there's got to be something simpatico between the two people or whomever are involved. You know, there's like a rhythm there. So I wonder if that's something that's, how necessary is it that your audience be in step with you?
It's one of those, there's certain elements to, for me, to my practice, that's just an experiment. Like, people are like, well, that's not going to work. I was like, well, it might not. Like, I would love that every piece that I ever made just rocked.
Right.
But I could be wrong.
How are you evaluating that?
It depends on the piece. So, you know, some pieces, like I did a huge, like three-year, it took me, it was like 7,000 square foot installation. And it was a series of, 20-foot embroidered tapestries, and it was to be read, you know, and it told a story. And I felt like sometimes people would read the little synopsis about it and they got it. Other times people would believe it and be like, that's not what it's about. Like, they came up with their own narrative. To me, the fact that they got in there and worked on it, like did something with it, that's successful. And then it's a question of like how. And I think, especially in the world we live in, that instantaneous, the ability for work to be instantaneously read is the sort of marker of work, and that's not just the way it works. I really believe that sometimes people will think about work and they'll get something out of it in 2 days, 3 days, or next year, and so I think legibility is not necessarily the telltale of success in a work, but engagement is. I feel like when viewers come in and not engaged, like I feel like oftentimes that's because there's no entry point. And if there's an entry point, they can enter the work, and there's a structure for understanding. Those are kind of like my parameters in terms of, like, I guess, in terms of the success. Like, oh, is there a place for people to enter? Can people find something here? And is there a structure to understand whatever I'm hoping to communicate? And then let's see what happens.
It sounds like you're saying also that time is a really important thing. You are somehow able to, or you want to somehow build an element that will require someone to slow down a little bit, and spend some time.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been coming over the last couple of years. I've been coming to grips with the fact that the work takes time. Like, it's work that, for me, I feel is for the curious. If you're curious, you see what's inside that bag.
Right.
There's something for you.
Right.
I eat real slow. I'm a big dude. I eat real slow. I have friends who like, what's going on? It's like certain things I'm not interested in rushing. I can eat fast. Just that doesn't appeal to me. And so I've been coming to grips with the idea that a lot of times the work has a sort of undercurrent as a oasis, or I'll take the oasis because it's too lush of a word, but just like it's a place where you can rest or pause. It's a place of pause. I grew up in Brooklyn. I run pretty fast. Like my day-to-day is like I'm pretty quick. Like I don't mind going to 5 boroughs in a day. And so I run around a lot, but I'm a big believer in pause. Whether it's just like a moment of pause to look at a photo on the train, or it's a moment to just think about something. And I feel like that's a very New York thing for me. You got 2 minutes, take your shoes off, walk in this little bit of grass, and then get back and keep running. Right. And so a lot of times there's an undercurrent of a place for pause in the work, or I think, and I've been coming to grips with that because I think for a long time I didn't, for whatever reason, admit it or see it. Yeah. And then I'm like, that's another piece where you can go, like A Life in Pictures, that project. Right. And it's a project where it was exactly that. It was a social space created sort of in response to a dematerialized socialization that's, I feel like, happening, where people don't have incidental contact, don't sit down with strangers, don't actually tangibly touch things. And so that move from a sensual to a kind of virtual, I was like, you know what, I'd love to activate and sort of manifest all of those digital images for over 10 years of having a digital camera and invite people to do it. So I printed out 1,200 photographs from my life and invited people. You come, you bring a photo from your life, you take a photo from my life, and you stay and you look through and you swap, and that archive that gets convoluted. That idea of authorship and biography again becomes convoluted, where my first big wheel, that photo is gone. Oh no, 10 years ago, which my friend's wedding, a photo from my friend's wedding gets swapped with someone else's wedding. And you see these points where you intersect with people's lives, but at the same time there's a sort of slippage that happens to that archive. And people came down and they stayed for, like, there was music, there was refreshments, and you sit down, you look through these photos and you talk to people from around the world, Brazil, Canada, Australia, Germany, and Jamaica, just chilling out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping that people would stay and just, take time. And I would say nobody was there for less than 20 minutes. People were there for like an hour, just hanging out.
So it worked, right?
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. I thought it was great. And, and also it's nice to have, to sort of, not memorialize, but to take a second to give to those instances. So you have like this photograph of going to the zoo.
Mm-hmm.
But you've not thought about going to the zoo or those people, 5 years.
Right.
And so you kick up all this dust. And even when you ask people, oh, just print up any photo. And they're like, oh, I got thousands of photos. Oh, okay, you can print up a photo. People are like, oh my God, it's like they haven't activated it. And when they have it, when they finally have it in their hand, there's this moment where they're like, I can touch it now. I can't get this up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's also cool that people like takeaways. People take things away.
Yeah. I mean, I'm listening. What I'm hearing you say is, we live in this kind of virtual space where images are shared all the time, but then something happens once that virtual image becomes the actual image, and then you're like exchanging it with another person. It seems there's something more personal about that. There's some more intimacy about taking the physical photograph and giving it up.
I would say even more so than the object. Like I was talking at a studio visit with somebody, and they said, does it matter what the photo is? I'm like, nope.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it doesn't even matter that it's photos.
No?
Not really. It's about the exchange. The exchange, the medium for that exchange is photography.
Mm-hmm.
But more so, it's what happens when you sit down with this person and they're like, what do you got?
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you talk about it? I took video if people wanted to say a little bit about the photo you brought and the photo you took.
Mm-hmm.
And I had people interview each other.
Mm.
And sometimes they would be there together and they're like, they start to tell a story and amend it.
Mm.
Like there were these two cousins that kept going back and forth, that's how it happened, this. And I thought that was really great. And also sharing it with a stranger.
Right.
And to me, that's really the work.
Yeah.
And it's weird sometimes to try and say, yeah, that's what I'm interested in, that's what I'm sculpting.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, but you can't touch that. And I was like, well, yeah, you kind of can.
Yeah. But, I might say that the conduit must be important. You know what I mean? Like, your reason for making it photographs, there's got to be a reason.
No, there are reasons for me. And there's an importance in the photos are important to me, and their photos, it being photography, it's important because we traffic all of these images, but it's subservient to the exchange of phenomena. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't do this on the net. You can't sit down with somebody. Mm-hmm. And people brought 4-foot photographs in. Mm-hmm. People brought in like really nice original 1950s, like somebody brought a tintype in.
Oh, and gave it away?
Somebody gave pictures of their kids. There's something about spending time in space with someone that's not very quantifiable, and it's not translatable. And that's what I was interested in, and I felt like for me, photos have a certain magic, and that's where it becomes personal. But I could have done it with sculptures. I could have done it with. I feel like when I said it wasn't important, it wasn't to say that it had no significance, but there are other things that would be significant, other mediums that would work and have significance. But this was the one that I came up doing photography. I feel like we traffic all these images. There was all these there's significance for me,
right,
and also beyond me. But it could have been something else,
right. And at times it has been other things.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's pennies, other times it's the
wishes.
Tickets, it's wishes, it's dreams.
Yeah.
But I'm really fascinated by what you say about the the exchange between individuals. Kind of creating these situations where people have to come together, right? Because I mean, that's precisely why we're here. You know, we find ourselves involved in this work that's been commonly called, well, at least presently being commonly called socially engaged. And for me, social engagement is really a simple idea, and it involves creating spaces for people to come together. And for that space and then that coming together to be a part of the practice, like that is really what the artist is coming from in the creative project, right? So I wanna hear about your definition of social engagement, if that's even something you feel like you need to involve yourself with in terms of defining what it is that you do.
I don't think for me, social engagement is not a separate, it's just part of the mix. It's like, one of the things as an artist I'm interested in is communicating and communicating and having dialogue. And I don't always find them to be the same, but both of those things are important to me and why I make work. So the notion that art would live in a place that didn't engage or didn't bring people together, whether it's, I make films. You make films and it's a social endeavor. It just is. Whether you're a director, you might shoot it, but then you have people acting, you have people helping you design it, and that community. And I came up, doing a lot of film. I miss it. Those people understand a kind of, even when you're working on the dumbest job, it's a kind of a sacred space, like.
Why?
Because you won't work a job where you have to trust people with your lives regularly. Like I've done jobs where I'm shooting and I'm being rigged off of an eight-story train lift. And my friend is like, really, who has become my friend, but he's the grip, and he's like, I really want to get this right. I was like, yeah, my life's in your hands. It's all right. I'll be mad at you. And I was joking with him, but I was like, yeah, you are rigging me to this, Or I'm working on I'm working in the snow, and we're running, 1,500 amps of electricity around me. You get that wrong, I die.
That's right.
You don't work 18, 20 hours with it and work that hard. There's a care, and it's really hard for people outside of that industry to sort of understand it sometimes. And it's really sacred because, like, people will ask you, when you're working with like your crew, they'll say things like, oh, is this okay? And you're like, whatever it takes. And you just get that, like, there was somebody, they want you to carry a 400-pound dolly up 5 flights of steps, put it on the roof because they forgot there was no freight elevator or no elevator. And you're like, really? But you're like, you know what, man, whatever it takes. Like, you're part of my crew, like, And so I don't find that in advertising. I don't find that in the art world. People are like, oh yeah, oh wow, it's really dark in here. You got NPR, you got the AC, you got some fruit. I'm like, no, it's gonna be tough today. And I feel like so I do find it to be kind of, and maybe it's because from years of working with that crew, it's a kind of sacred space. And I really love it,
I want to talk about trust because you brought that up. When you said that word, I immediately thought about that in relation to your artwork, because it requires a lot of trust from both people involved, from all people involved, I mean, you have to trust in your viewer, in the participant, in the audience, to want to dance with you, and then they have to trust you to want to dance with you too, or to at least even want to approach that possibility of dancing with you. You know what I mean? How do you see that word playing out in your practice?
This photographer said to me one time, this guy Larry Fink, he's an amazing photographer. I like Larry a lot. And he was like, you could be an artist or you could be a salesman. And it didn't really make sense to me, because I was like, people sell art. I was like, you sell art. And over time, I sort of got what he was saying. Is like, I believe there's a certain level of vulnerability that that is required to make art. Like, if you're gonna make art, if you're gonna be, for me, if I'm gonna be an artist and I'm not willing to be vulnerable, I'm bullshit. And it's tough, because there are times when you kind of don't want to do that, or like, you know. But this is what I do. This is what I choose, and I think that kind of trust is based in a belief that this is worthwhile to do. Sometimes you will fall on your face, and I don't think that it's like jumping in the air. And if people catch you, that didn't mean that you were right to jump in the air. Like, you probably will. There's a lot of places in the world you're going to go where there's no proof, and so that's where belief comes in. Sometimes you will fall on your face, sometimes you will fly, and for me, that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in going to those places where you jump off the cliff, where you're like, I don't know, but we'll see. You know, yeah, I think that trust is something to spend time with work, to mix it up with me or mash it up, or you know, I've done pieces, sculptures that you climb on, and there's one called Walk the Plank, where you walked up and you walked out, and it doesn't really make sense till you get to the end and you see there's a little hole, and you look through it and you see yourself looking back, and you see yourself with all the like anxiety and like tension to walk out on this like 10-foot plank that's just all crickety, and you're like, this is artist built. Artists can't build nothing. And you get there and you see yourself, and I hope that people sort of see that hesitation in living, that how much we hesitate to live, manifest in that moment. And you're like, oh, you know what? We gotta try something else new. You know, and it does take a lot of trust, and that's why I really love my curious viewers.
Yeah, I mean, you know, how much of the work is, just building off of what you said about self-reflection, how much of the work is about that? Is about turning the mirror back on to self? And why?
Well, a lot of my work is about trying to intersect with an idea, and that idea is actualizing fantastic space. So it goes back to, I used to write poetry, and then I learned how to do photography, and I thought, I'll just take pictures of my poems. And I really got my ass kicked. I was like, you can't take pictures of certain things. It doesn't translate, you know? And not only that, I realized that there was an economy that was unseen. There was a system of intangibles. And I continued with photography, and part of that was about sort of providing proof. It was like, I see this interaction, I see these gestures, I can prove it. And I quickly moved away from that and was like, I want to show things that you can't prove. And then I started thinking about, there's a whole bunch of things that, you know, customs that we believe. So like wishes. Excuse me. Pennies are pretty worthless now. But in this country, we still make wishes on them, and we would say, oh yeah, you could definitely do that. But what happens when we actually make that real? When we make a hall of fame for these wishes, that these things that are supposed to be temporal, what happens when we canonize them? What happens when we try to put the moment, a momentary desire in a continuum of eternity? You know, that's sort of what I'm interested in. Or the fantastic space of dance-a-thons, or wishes, or dreams, and dream books, or looking at the virtual spaces that we dip in and out as a kind of fantastic space. What happens when we make them real? Do people want to see photos, wade through 1,000 photos from, that are like this tight, of people being like at a party? But at the same time, what happens when you just have like a field? It's just a photo of a field. That, if you were just shooting shutterbugging like most people do when they go to an event, it wouldn't inspire. But you have it there in front of you. You can spend more time with it, or there's something odd about that. So taking those things that are virtual and making them real, for me, was again a kind of fantastic space. Or the stars, I did that project, Wayward North, that had those star maps. Really came out of, I fell in love with this woman who was sailing around the world, and I was like, we can make our own constellations, because the thing about those stories, it's a way to communicate over distance. And I thought that would be really great. And we never did it. We broke up.
But some great art came out of that.
Like 4 years later, 2, 3, 4 years later, something like that. And I was like, you can engage with the work no matter where you are in the world. You can look up, find those stars, plot those constellations, and that's what people have been doing in cultures around the world again. But it's a fantastic space. Most of those stars aren't even there. Like those stars, burnt out and supernova, and the light, they're just so far away that we're just getting the light. So even these things that we sort of see as being concrete, there's a certain intangibility, there's a phantomness to it, and so a lot of the work has to do with being here, not being here.
Yeah, I mean, you said something really incredible. You were talking about systems of, what was the word you used? Intangibility. Systems of intangibility. And first you said economy, like maybe you could also switch economy into replace system, economies of intangibility.
Both, yeah.
Could that phrase be used to describe what you do?
I would hope so. Maybe.
Could that just like stand in as, if you wanted to write an artist statement, or that would be like something you would write in your artist statement?
So.
I'm just fascinated by what that means. Like what is that? What are those economies of intangibility?
It depends on when we, it can be, some people call it superstition, some people call it custom, some people call it feng shui, some people call it, building code, some people call it law, some people call it history. All of these things have a certain invisible structure and are traded. So you can take something like the Olympics. I was watching Olympics the other day, and Queen of England's there, and then like she's absolutely overjoyed, and she was sitting still, stone faced.
You would never have been able to know.
And they are talking about her like she is losing her mind, like she's an 8-year-old with 2 liters of soda in her. They are going on and on. And that is a historical record. They showed her for a second. And never, like there's this discrepancy, but that's history.
Right.
And for me, that play is like, that's interesting in it. But it happens in, it happens with law, whether it's, vagrancy or what's another? There were laws that were put on the books just to catch all. Like it was law institutionalized.
Loitering or something.
Yeah, loitering. But they had a purpose. Their use wasn't in line with what it was said to enforce. And so in all of these different fields, these structures all have kind of play that's, like I said, like intangible. And in our lives, I think in the West, we sort of pretend not to, we acknowledge the unseen. And I mean, that's just like a post-enlightenment thing, but I think a lot of places in the world, things that you can't touch, things that you can't prove, are kind of part of culture. Like, of course. Like the studio I picked, it wasn't the biggest. I picked it because I was like, it's got good energy. There's crazy people in here. There's crazy people in it. And I think we shy away from things that we know because we can't prove, or things that we believe, So I'm interested in that space.
It also sounds like you're describing, when you talk about the system that's built around the intangible thing, that there's some kind of limitation or failure on behalf of the system to really be able to grasp all that is the formless, right? You were saying that with law, there's like this disconnect between, what the law is and what it's intended to enforce, and the commentator describing what the queen is doing, but she's actually not doing that at all, but that's how it's going to go down. That's what she was doing, right? So do you build those kinds of limitations or instabilities into the systems that you devise for people to engage in?
I don't know that the initial system is limited as much as sometimes it's not a concern of it. It's just not a concern of science in some ways, or like, what it may not. I use science as an example, but going back to law, it's not necessarily a concern of that law, that state law, that federal law. And then in terms of the instability, so I think with regards to, say, outside systems, outside of the systems I create, sometimes it's not the concern, sometimes it's not profitable. There are all a myriad of reasons why the unseen is sort of disavowed. With regards to me, that instability, I think, is inherent in the proposal. So to say, I'll make a wish Hall of Fame, to say I'm gonna take a black vernacular phrase like selling wolf tickets and sell wolf tickets, to propose that is already unstable. And it's completed and stabilized in the engagement with the viewer. And I think as an artist, I have some hand in buttressing it up and giving it some rigidity, some ability to stand. But it's really the viewer that sort of gets it to live. But that instability is the vulnerability that you were bringing up earlier. That's just in the work.
So where is the art in the work?
What do you mean?
Where would you locate the art? Can you say that this right here, this is the art? Oh no, maybe that's the art. How does one start to identify art?
I was about to say, I try and stay away from that game.
Talk about it.
I just think that there are people and their job is to figure out where the art is. And I feel like a a lot of it's in the dare, in the provocation. It's in the taking that step. I think it's Barbara Jordan Walker, but I could be wrong, who said, faith is not when you're on a cliff and there's darkness all around you and you step out and you step on something solid. It's when you step off that cliff and you feel nothing, but you know you'll sprout wings and fly. And I was like, that's the work where you say, you know what, I'm gonna take a chance on this. I guess there's execution, there's all these things that are evaluatable, things that you can be like, okay, you know. But I think the challenge, I guess, I don't know what art is. The challenge in my practice is to keep jumping off cliffs and to keep like trying to find spaces and have conversations that are a little awkward or I may not have a language for. I think language is really important to me. Like, how do you? I think a lot of times I build systems or I make systems of reference systems that I ask viewers to participate in. Like, I'm working on a piece that's mental experiences, and so building compounds from these. In science, they actually call them qualia. It's like these really basic experiences that one may have. So I guess that's the challenge for me. That's the work, to be like, okay, I'm going to try something. You're
in a community of artists. You're subject to crit,
Oh.
you know. I'm talking about here in this situation, you know, and subjecting yourself to, you know, like the MFA, right? I feel like you have to confront all of that baggage of art history when you enter an MFA program as a contemporary person, right? And this art history may or may not be relevant to you, but you have to confront the art question. You know what I mean? You're in a sculpture program?
No, I'm in new genres.
New genres.
Yeah, they already confronted it for me.
Right.
No,
right.
but I hear you. We're going one.
But just to think about how something like new genres forms within that system.
Well, it comes out of a kind of departure from virtuosity, to be honest. And I think a lot of my work is not about virtuosity. There are things I can do exceptionally well. Sometimes I employ those things. Sometimes I use the way I think about those things to things that I am a novice at. To me, the work is about a journey and about being articulate through those mediums. That shift is what makes new genre programs possible, you know, where you don't necessarily need to be a painter to use paint or a photographer to use, you know, photography. And I think that question of like where the art lies, I think a lot of it comes out of, I think that question's not as relevant. I think that within that world, because you were saying that I'm in an art historical and art academic context, and I am, but I feel like, and I said sometimes, because there are different spheres. There's academia, there's art market, and then there's a whole continuum of art practices that are not part of, you know, either of those. And they happen around the world and have happened throughout time. So I try and sort of think about those two spheres as part of my practice. So within within sort of academia, the art, locating the art, I feel like is in the proclamation. To say this thing is art. The artist is now given the right to assert that and have that taken at face value.
Can anything be art then?
Yeah. It has been for a few years, for a few centuries, you know. And so, I mean, you can go back to like Duchamp and that assertion, or you can go to, you know, people who really like William Pobell, you know, with the crawl, that performance, or just performance art, or video, like early video art where it was like, this is not gonna last more than 30 viewings, this tape is gonna be trash. Or, you know, so, or you can even look at somebody like Pollock. Like, is the art actually the painting, or is it the action? I think that the assertion is really where the art gets located within both academia and the market. For me, the work is located in the league.
So then, you know, I'm thinking now, if anything can be art, right? Then where's the marketability in that? How does that then shift the market, or what we know of as the art market?
I feel like the art market is a funny place. It's a funny place. I mean, you can sell remnants. You can sell, what was it? Tom Freeman was selling fecal matter, or balls of fecal matter, but he also made beautiful sculptures out of his own hair and silly putty. You know, and just like that, you can. You know, how do you sell a tourist piece of Kennedy? You know, or there's just there, as long as there's something, because really what's being sold is a cultural cachet. And if you can find something that is tangible, that can be exclusive, it can be sold.
So the market, you're saying, will kind of expand or contract itself as necessary to be able to sustain itself.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's self-leveling.
Self-leveling.
Yeah. It's like, it'll find a way, and it has found a way. I mean, you look at video art in the 60s, like that stuff was hard to move, you know, but now you have, you know, limited edition DVDs that can be reproduced on somebody's laptop, selling for 6 figures, easy. You know, so the market will find the market will take care of itself. Like, I don't need to worry about that.
So generosity, I'm really interested in this notion of generosity as the component of that kind of exchange that I was talking about earlier, that's a part of social engagement. So generosity for me is the motivation. Or if it's not the motivation, then it's in some way the product that comes out of the exchange. You know, there's this kind of generousness that either instigates or is a result of, or, you know, it's in some way a property of the exchange that's happening. How do you think your work relates to this notion of generosity?
It's funny because I laugh in part because I'm like, I got something to give. I don't know how generous I am. Like, I don't know how people want it. You know,
Right,
when I think about generosity, I think like you give somebody a gem. That's generous. I was like, I offer people what I got sometimes, and sometimes it's like it's ugly. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's sexy. Sometimes it's a little weird. You know, but that willingness to exchange again goes back to like why I'm doing this thing.
Right.
You know, so I don't find it to be, again, a separate portion.
I mean, it's like you said, you know, it's not necessarily about the object, but about the act. You know, so this generousness is about this action of giving. You know, a lot of times people are given things or want to give away things if other people don't want it all. They don't want them, they can't use them.
Free chairs.
Exactly.
Get those free chairs.
But there's still an inherent generosity in that compulsion to give away, right? So there's this giving away, but then there's also a receiving that happens consciously or unconsciously. You may be aware, you may be unaware. So I wonder what you feel you get back from those who exchange with you.
It depends, like I said, I really love it when people are like, this is wrong. And like I did a series of poems that were point spreads. I was doing a series of photographs and poems about football, American football. And I would have a point spread. So a point spread is usually used in gambling. Say it'll be the Jets versus the Giants. The Jets are the favorites, and they're favored by 2 over the Giants. So you'll see that in the back of, newspapers and everything. They have a line in Vegas. So I thought about describing a football game, as a series of point spreads. So in the first quarter, Grace might be a 1-point favorite over nastiness or brute force, or it might be like might be more conceptual, like Grimm Brothers versus Cinderellas. Cinderellas might have the upper hand in the first quarter, and as the game goes on, there are all these like plays and shifts in those in that hierarchy. And somebody came up to me and was like, I think I said Coltrane was a 2-point favorite. 2-point underdog over Big Band. This idea of a team versus a soloist.
Right.
And I was like, are you crazy? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, Coltrane and an underdog to Big Band? And I was like, oh. And I thought that was like a gem. I was like, I felt like my eyes were real little. I felt like my eyes got like this big. And I said, so what's the spread on that? He was like, that's at least 14, 15. And then I was like, what else is wrong? And he went through, and it was nice that, so in that moment, he bought into this idea, this alchemy. A lot of the work is alchemy. It's not a true system, but like once you start playing in that world, we can dance. And he thought about these things and told me how they were off. And the same thing with a lot of the work, like the wishes. People start thinking about, oh, what are those things that I wanted so much, but I let go like 4 years ago. That now if I was to make a Hall of Fame for wishes, that, oh, this is one I would want to have in. And it's that kind of exchange that I'm aware of, and also that they do on their own. Part of it I don't ever see. Part of that exchange I believe in happens, but then part of it I get, and that's gravy, and I love that.
And we're done.